اما در مجموع قصه سرایی رو در فیلم دوست ندارم، هیجان آوردن به هیجان آوردن به تماشاچی رو توی فیلم دوست ندارم، نصیحت کردنش رو دوست ندارم، تحقیر کردنش رو دوست ندارم، احساس گناه کردن بهش دادن رو دوست ندارم.
سکانس 4 پلان 1 برداشت 1
حرکت. خیلی خوب همونجا که هستی باش.
"1979 was the year that marked the beginning of a new era for Iran. It was the year when Ayatollah Khomeini came into power and the Islamic Revolution was going to pave a new direction for Iran. Many Iranians were unsure what to make of it or what was the future of Iranian art going to be. Some artists and filmmakers decided to flee the country, while others felt they might lose their identity if they were to bloom anywhere else other than Iranian soil. Abbas Kiarostami was one of those artists, and this is a celebration of his work.
بیاین از اینجا،
بیا اولی رو
یه دونه بیا از اینجا رد شید.
خوبه.
من برش
خوبه.
عزیزم من چکل خوبه پیرزنی دختر جوانی خوبی بیاد من یه پیرزنی فیلم داری برای چیزمه دختر خانم مالت خوبه سلامتی خسته نباشی.
About a month ago, Abbas Kiarostami passed away, leaving a massive legacy of post-revolution Iranian films with him. Personally, Kiarostami films have always resonated with me because his work depicted real-life people through the lens of fascinating Iranian poetry, quasi-documentary style filmmaking, and his metaphysical perception of life and death. Which seems natural since other than filmmaking, Kiarostami was heavily involved in other mediums of art such as photography, painting, graphic design, and yes, of course, poetry.
Il y a une relation très profonde chez Abbas Kiarostami entre le poids de sa parole et ce qu'on retrouve dans son œuvre.
In 1969, a young Abbas Kiarostami became highly fascinated by the Darish Marjoui's film, The Cow, a film that arguably spelled the beginning of the new Iranian wave of filmmaking.
سلام کت خود.
سلام علیکم آشتی خانم. حالا مشتستان چطوره؟
حالش خوب نیست کت خود. دیشب من خوابم برده بود زده به سر. چیزی به صبح نمونده بود که خونین و مالین برگشت.
Kiarostami was keen on pursuing his career as a filmmaker, making numerous short films in the process. During the 70s and most of the 80s, Kiarostami made dozens of films for the Educational Institute for Children. This brought a new sense of a worldview for Kiarostami, as a child's perception vastly differs from an adult, and this made him question sociological norms of society. Shot almost completely without the aid of dialogues, his films from the Children's Institute grasp the audience through diverse visual techniques and stark shadows, representing the onset emotion that his young protagonists are facing through. Like many other prominent filmmakers of the time, Kiarostami was also influenced by Italian neorealism and often strived to depict the harsh realities in pre-revolution Iran with non-professional actors and film equipment. After working in the Iranian film industry for several years, Kiarostami made his directorial feature-length debut in 1973 with the film The Experience, and a year later, The Traveler. through his first feature-length film, many thematic elements such as childhood and adolescence, societal conventions, boyhood, or even lack of spoken dialogue came into play in his later films. Due to his illustrious, rich literature backdrop, Kiarostami cultivated unique ways of depicting human emotions, mainly through silence and imagery. This was achievable due to his quasi-documentary approach to filmmaking, where one could hardly distinguish fiction from reality. Where Is My Friend's House, a film that cemented his style of filmmaking and started gaining international attention. Like Akira Kurosawa, Kiarostami's popularity within his home country was limited, but outside, many started becoming aware of his film intellect, and his approach quickly became well established as his own. Unlike conventional filmmaking, where each scene is shot within a collage of different shots, Kiarostami preferred longer static takes, as rhythm always played an important role in his works.
Hello? Hello? الو اگه صدای منو میشنوی گوشی رو نگه دارین قطع نکنین من برم تو ارتفاع
This scene is a benchmark example of Kiarostami's intentional absurdity and humor, something that wouldn't have been achievable through different cuts within the scene. Rhythm was the key element to his works. In many realms of filmmaking, his work has always been concluded as individualistic and heavily influenced by Iranian poetry, as he meticulously captures the visual essence of it. But this somehow, I feel, limits our perception towards his films. He loved exploring human conditions and moral ambiguity, the so-called moment of truth that always withheld any narrative that Kiarostami worked on. For him, this moment of truth was the moment of realization for his character. This moment explored the moral boundaries of his protagonist. The act of conviction becomes essential at points, which is then struck with a sense of rejection that could include denial in Through the Olive Trees, death in Taste of Cherry, salvation in Close Up, or existential realization in The Wind Will Carry Us. These moments are essentially Kiarostami in nature. When the characters are pushed further into their individual self-exploration, the beauty of his work lies not within the exterior conditions where his characters live in, but rather their subjective ideas that have always been molded due to their living conditions and environment. In his film Through the Olive Trees, the main character tries to convince the girl of his dreams why she should accept his marriage proposal.
خب پس تو اونو به دلیل اینکه سواد نداره نمیخوای ها؟ خب اونم به دلیلی که سواد نداری نمیخواد اینکه دیگه دلخوری نداره داره؟
نه دلخورم نیستم.
چرا؟ چرا؟ یه کمی دلخوری
من فکر میکنم که اگه بخوان خونه داره با خونه داره ازدواج کنم پول داره با پول داره بی سوادا با بی سوادا توی زندگی نمیشه. بهتره اگه با سوادا با بی سوادا ازدواج کنن پول داره با پول نداره ازدواج کنن خونه ندارن با خونه داره که این یا دیگه رو بتونن رو به راه کنن. از نظر من این بهتره.
This out-of-the-ordinary sense of reasoning cements his character as a social rebel who refuse to confine themselves within the fundamental structure of our human existence. Abbas Kiarostami once has stated, "We can never get close to the truth except through lying." His characters are often flawed beings who justify their existence through personal biases towards their current situation. A perfect example could certainly be Kiarostami's dark comedy Close Up. This film is a reenactment of a real-life fallacy portrayed through the characters from the actual event. This clearly shows Kiarostami's meta-sense of humor, seeped deep within the art of lying to gain social status in life, and arguably his most diverse work in his filmography.
ببخشید این کتاب رو از کجا خریدین؟ ببخشید آقا این کتاب رو از کجا خریدین؟
کتاب فروشی
کدوم کتاب فروشی؟ میخواستم یکی بخرم.
قابل نمیشه.
خیلی ممنون. میخوام با پول بگیرم.
باشه
شما برای خودتون
نه خودم نوشتم این رو. این میتونم بده بشم.
شما خودتون نوشتین اینو؟ شما خودتون نوشتین؟ شما آقای مفرباقی؟
بله.
خیلی خوشبختم.
خواهش.
Is réalisé par Abbas Kiarostami.
Taste of Cherry, a film that won Palme d'Or at Cannes and made Kiarostami among the intellectual elite of world cinema, explores the thematic elements of life and death. The fragility of life is obvious in the eyes of our protagonist, Mr. Badi, but his motives of committing suicide are never fully explored, but rather, it is the journey of him finding a partner to bury him after his death that surrounds the core narrative of the film, the so-called Kiarostami's moment of truth.
میفهمی حرفمو؟ خب حرفمو میفهمی؟ خب اگه میفهمی پاشو بیا پایین. پاشو بیا پایین یه نگاهی بکن. یه نگاهی بکن. صبح زود ساعت 6 که میای. ببین 200 قدم راه. پادگان شما اونه دیگه مگه نه؟ از اینجا تا اینجا 20 دقیقه راه. تو این 20 دقیقه صبح خودتو میرسونی اینجا. منو دوبار صدا میکنی. میگی آقای بدی، آقای بدی. اگه جواب تو دادم که یه چی دستم میگیری میام بیرون. به پول تا میرسی و میری.
Kiarostami has always upheld a minimalistic approach with barely any cuts within a certain scene, giving his actors a breathing space to regurgitate their dialogues and long periods of silences. This creates a distant view for the audience, who might be visually sitting next to the actor, but are much further away outside the film, as if we are only allowed to peep through the window of our perceived sense of reality.
برق هستش بعد از اون دیگه قطع میشه. شما باید از چراغ قوه استفاده کنید. خب برق رفت.
In films after Taste of Cherry, Kiarostami played around with embedding the audience in complete darkness at times, using sound as the key source of narration and atmosphere.
کسی اینجا نیست؟ یکم شیر گفتم برامو بدوشین.
بده تابرات بگیرم.
خیلی تاریکه اینجا. چجوری شیر میدوشین شما اینجا؟
ما عادت کردیم.
His critics have often argued that his many ambiguous endings to his stories seem a confusing cop-out that dodges narrative issues rather than resolving them. While the ambiguity is obvious, I believe Kiarostami's work is incredibly self-referential. His refusal to answer simple questions are never drawbacks of his work, but rather a negation to the viewer for a conclusive answer. Did she finally accept his marriage proposal in the end? Did he actually kill himself by the end of the film? These questions are inconsequential to the actual narrative of his storytelling. This is, I feel, Kiarostami's way of weaving philosophical webs around a narrative, and the concrete conclusion to a particular story would ultimately destroy a deceptively simple tale.
میخوری بس دیر نشده نیما گفت 1 رو به 10 شروع میشه من الان 9 و 20 دقیقه است پیش تو نه من نمیام.
One of the visual key elements of Kiarostami's filmmaking was his love for confined spaces, which ultimately forced his characters to reveal their true selves. He mainly achieved such moments of emotions through close-ups of his two protagonists with camera A and camera B. What fascinated Kiarostami was how the front of the car positions the passengers, sitting side by side rather than facing one another. He felt that the long stretch of road in front of them was the void, that they stare in while revealing their true inner feelings towards one another. Quite similar to the couch therapy of Freud.
10 provided an opportunity for me to use a stationary camera in a moving room like a car, which is my favorite location. This camera gives the filmmaker an opportunity for experimenting without fear of losing the essential. It's a liberty for the filmmaker to discover an ideal beauty.
After his highly successful critical film, The Wind Will Carry Us, Kiarostami drastically sought out to change his previous methods of filmmaking. This was also the time when Kiarostami became highly favorable towards digital filmmaking. To him, digital meant freedom. Freedom to the actors, who can explore the characters for long stretches of time without hearing the dreaded word cut from the director. Freedom for the director, who does not need to constantly keep taking different takes and use valuable film footage. And of course, freedom for the audience, who is no longer confined to precision, but rather witnessing a display of projected reality unfold in front of them. By early 2000s, with films like ABC Africa, 10, and later Schirin, Abbas Kiarostami's films became less poetic and more situational, where the surrounding played a central role to the film's plot. His highly improvised film 10 abandoned his previous methods of many script writing conventions and explored the socio-political landscape of Iran. Without breaking any of the Iran set of rules of censorship, Kiarostami explored the thematic elements of womanhood, prostitution, and divorce. In 2010, Kiarostami directed his first long-awaited foreign-language film, Ceritifed Copy, with Juliette Binoche. This film also marked his return to his trademark cinematic poetry, but this time with a European backdrop.
Nowhere I particularly want to go. I'm happy just driving.
Driving around.
Well, you got to do the driving. I get to sit here and look at the view.
Right. I have an idea. I can take you to a place you find it interesting.
Kiarostami's final work, Like Someone in Love, was also a foreign language film, shot completely in Japan and Japanese as the core language of communication. Like majority of his later work, he further explored the contingencies of womanhood under a relatively free Western-influenced society, but his core thematic element, the moment of truth, never left his films.
まあ喧嘩ぐらいありますよね。大したことないですよ。こういうのってあんま迷わない方がいいと思うんですよね。うちのじいちゃんもそんなこと言ってたんですけど、本気で惚れたなって思う人に出会ったら絶対一緒になった方がいいって。
Sadly, in early 2016, he was suffering from gastrointestinal cancer, and on July 4th, Abbas Kiarostami passed away, leaving a huge legacy behind him.
نه خاور نه باختر نه شمال نه جنوب همینجا که من ایستادم.
When asked why he decided to stay in post-revolution Iran after the uncertainty of his future as a filmmaker, he replied, "When you take a tree that is rooted in the ground and transfer it from one place to another, the tree will no longer bear fruit, and if it does, the fruit will not be as good as it was in its original place. This is a rule of nature. I think if I had left my country, I would be the same as the tree." I think it's safe to assume that his work touched and influenced countless filmmakers throughout the world. His sensitive yet brutal depiction of human sanity brought a universal approach to his films, making his characters resonate within our minds after each passing year. Abbas Kiarostami's films became stepping stone not just for Iranian cinema, but his work accomplished what many big-budget film studios fail at grasping: the heart and soul behind a film.
این نقد بگیر و دست از آن نسیت بدار تا آواز دهل شنیدن از